San Francisco Airport had always been like a beehive, noisy, crowded, with people rushing about their business. That day, when Bob boarded the flight to New York, he had no idea that the flight would turn into a test of his patience. He chose a window seat, hoping to spend a few hours in peace. But as soon as he placed his backpack in the overhead compartment, he felt a sharp gaze on him. "Excuse me, that's my seat," said a middle-aged woman with short blonde hair in a cold, authoritative tone. Her face had a tired but disdainful expression. Bob raised an eyebrow and looked at his boarding pass. "No, ma'am. Mine. 14A. The woman scowled and glanced at her own ticket. She had 14B, the seat next to his. "Oh," she said, but didn't move. Maybe you could swap seats with my son? He's sitting in the 15th row." Bob politely shook his head. "Sorry, but I'll stay here." The woman tightened her lips and quickly sat down, as if afraid her hand might brush against him. "Of course," she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for him to hear. "What else can you expect?" Bob took a deep breath. His time at military academy had taught him to ignore such things. But other passengers started to take notice. When the plane began taxiing for takeoff, the woman suddenly turned to the stewardess. "Excuse me," she said with a voice full of fake concern. "I don't feel safe next to this man. Can I change seats?" The stewardess looked at her in surprise. "Ma'am, did he do anything that concerns you?" "No, but—" She swallowed and shrugged. "It's just a feeling. I don't need to explain my feelings, do I?" The plane was speeding up for takeoff, so moving seats wasn't possible. The stewardess seemed unwilling to escalate the situation. "We can address this after takeoff," she said in a neutral tone, then walked away. The woman sighed loudly, as if this was an awful ordeal. She gripped her purse tighter and turned to face the aisle. Bob didn't look at her again, but he could feel the tension, as though she was radiating cold through the air between them. But she didn't calm down. A few minutes after the plane reached cruising altitude, she pressed the stewardess call button again. "I can't sit here. I'm afraid for my safety." "Ma'am," the stewardess replied calmly, "he hasn't done anything. You can't accuse someone just because of your personal feelings." "This is not just a feeling." The woman raised her voice. "It's common sense." Several passengers started listening to the conversation. Some looked at them with interest, others with annoyance. "Ma'am," the stewardess's voice became firmer, "if you don't stop disturbing the peace on board, we'll have to take action." The woman tightened her lips. Her eyes flashed. "Fine. I know how to solve this." She reached for her purse and pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the airline. I'm going to tell them you're forcing me to sit next to." She froze. Because Bob, calmly and without a word, took out his wallet, opened it, and showed her a small ID. An FBI agent's badge. Her face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The plane flew on, and the atmosphere in the cabin grew even more tense. The woman named Pam blinked, trying to understand if this was a joke. But the ID was real. The black leather cover, the golden badge, and the name Robert Bob Carlyle were clearly engraved on the plastic. Silence fell over the cabin. Even those who had previously ignored the scene were now watching it. "Why you?" Her voice trembled. "You're from the FBI?" Bob didn't change his expression. "Do you still have any intuitive concerns about my presence here?" he asked calmly. Pam blinked again. She looked at the phone in her hand, as if trying to find an escape from the situation. I just thought." "What exactly?" Bob raised an eyebrow. The stewardess stood nearby, waiting for her answer. Some passengers, who had previously looked on with open irritation, were now watching with concealed satisfaction. Pam felt hot shame flood her face. "I didn't know." "And would that change anything?" Bob asked, leaning in slightly closer. Pam opened her mouth, but couldn't respond. "Ma'am," the stewardess intervened, using her most professional tone. "Would you like me to find you another seat?" This was Pam's chance to save face. She could just leave and forget the moment like a bad dream. But she felt like she had lost control of the situation, and that angered her. "Yes," she said sharply. "Please find me a seat farther away." The stewardess nodded and walked off to consult with the crew. Bob turned back to the window. He had no intention of continuing this circus. But something told him this wasn't over yet. A few minutes later, the stewardess returned. "Ma'am, the plane is full. The only available seat is in the back, by the bathroom. Would you like to move there?" Pam pressed her lips together. Clearly, this was even worse than sitting next to Bob. "No," she muttered. "Then stay in your seat," the stewardess said and walked away. For a moment, it seemed like the situation had calmed down. But Pam wasn't going to give up so easily. She looked around, noticed two men in the neighboring row, and leaned toward them. "This is abnormal," she whispered loudly enough for Bob to hear. "We all need to be more careful here." One of the men, a bald white American man in his 50s, shrugged. "What do you mean?" "Did you see that?" He showed his ID. "But who verified that it's real?" Bob sighed softly. "Ma'am," he said without turning around, "this ID is real." But Pam just sneered. "Do you know who else carries fake badges? Con artists. Haven't you read the news?" The second man, a younger Latino sitting next to the first, looked at Bob, then at Pam. "Lady, maybe you should just stop?" "I'm just saying it's weird," Pam persisted. "Have you ever wondered why a guy like that has an FBI badge? A guy like that?" This time, Bob turned his head and looked straight at her. Pam froze. "What do you mean by that?" Bob didn't raise his voice, but his gaze became cold, like steel. She finally realized she had gone too far. "No, you didn't just." He leaned in closer. "You made assumptions the moment you saw me. And now you're trying to convince others of your fantasy." The man beside her nervously shifted away. "Buddy, I'm not getting into this," he muttered. She already did. Bob didn't take his eyes off Pam. "And now I have a question. Why are you afraid of me, ma'am?" Pam opened her mouth, but no words came out. The plane flew through the night sky, but the tension in the cabin felt almost physical. Pam felt her back damp with sweat. Everyone around her was watching. Some with curiosity, others with irritation. "I'm not afraid," she nervously smiled. "No." Bob shook his head. "Then why are you acting this way?" Pam swallowed hard. You're acting suspiciously." "Oh, really?" He crossed his arms over his chest. "Because I didn't speak to you first? Or because I didn't listen to your nonsense premonitions?" Pam gripped the armrest harder. "I have a right to express my opinion." "You do," Bob nodded. "But if that opinion is aimed at publicly humiliating me, expect consequences. I didn't do anything wrong. You claimed I was dangerous with no grounds. You tried to incite the other passengers. And now, when you realize I won't stay silent, you're playing the victim. Are you threatening me?" Her voice rose an octave higher. "No, ma'am, I'm warning you." His tone remained steady, but his eyes flashed with ice. Passengers began to exchange displeased looks. "Enough of the circus," someone from the back row shouted. "Leave the guy alone," another added. But Pam couldn't stop. She saw the situation slipping out of her control, and she desperately needed to regain authority. She pressed the stewardess call button sharply. Bob closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. She's really stubborn. A minute later, the same stewardess arrived. "What happened?" Pam pointed at Bob. He's acting aggressively." The stewardess sighed. "Ma'am, I've been observing you from the beginning. You're creating a problem out of nothing." "You don't understand." Pam panicked. "He's intimidating me." "Enough." The stewardess's voice became firm. "If you don't calm down, we'll be forced to take action." Do I have to leave? Pam looked around at the passengers, seeking support. But now it was clear they were all against her. You know what? Bob finally spoke. He took out his phone and calmly raised it to his face. Repeat what you just said, ma'am. What? I'm recording. You don't mind, do you? Her eyes widened. This is illegal. No, ma'am, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. What's illegal is your unfounded accusations. Pam suddenly realized she had trapped herself. Her gaze darted around. What? He took a step closer. Her lips trembled. I was wrong. Please say it louder. I was wrong, she muttered, lowering her eyes. Silence returned to the plane. Bob turned off the recording and put his phone away. Good. The stewardess looked at Pam with obvious disappointment. This is your final warning, ma'am. One more baseless complaint, and the captain will decide whether you should stay on board. Pam nodded silently. She shrank into her seat, as if trying to disappear. Bob calmly sat down and turned back to the window. The conflict was over, but he could feel this was not the end. The plane continued its journey, and the tension in the cabin gradually faded. Pam sat in silence, her shoulders slumped, and her face expressed confusion. She could still feel cold sweat reluctantly leaving her skin, though the frantic, nervous tension around her had subsided. Bob remained calm, as if nothing had happened. He was already lost in his thoughts again, but his watchful gaze remained unchanged. Every movement, every word of Pam's was observed by him like a predator who senses victory, but isn't in a hurry to claim it. A few minutes after the stewardess left the cabin, Pam unexpectedly slowly moved her lips. I'm sorry. Bob, without turning his head, quietly replied. For what? For my words. For all the accusations. I was wrong, and I know it. Now his gaze became more measured, and his tone softer. Have you ever asked yourself why I reacted the way I did? He asked. Pam shook her head. She still didn't fully understand what had happened to her behavior. She had been stubborn, trying to cover her insecurities with aggression and distrust. We often react not to people, but to our own fears. You don't know me, and I don't know you. You could have approached me, invited me to a conversation, but you immediately started defending yourself because you're afraid. It's not about race, gender, or age. It's simply human weakness. Pam silently absorbed every word he said. It wasn't the gesture she was used to seeing in the world around her. People didn't try to understand. They were more eager to fight, without thinking about who would actually suffer. How did you do it? She asked quietly, unexpectedly to herself. Bob tilted his head back and closed his eyes for a few seconds. Then he opened them and turned back to her. I worked in the police for many years. Do you think I didn't know people who treated me differently just because of the color of my skin? Believe me, I know what it's like to be judged not by my actions, but by who I am. But I have two choices. Either I react to it the same way, or I show that nothing has changed when we start listening to each other. I chose the second. Pam felt her heart tighten with guilt. She hadn't even realized how much she had been affecting people with her stereotypes, how she herself had been a victim of her own assumptions, with no chance of change. I don't know what to say, she whispered, trying to gather her thoughts. You don't need to say anything. Bob turned back to the window. Just think about it, and when the time comes, you'll understand. A silence settled between them again, but it wasn't as heavy as before. It was different now, lighter, filled with something new. Pam knew that her life would never be the same again. And this small conversation might be the first step she took to change her attitude towards others, to learn to be more tolerant and open. She felt that there was an opportunity to start over, to change herself, to see people as they truly are, without skin color or any labels. and Bob, though silent, gave the feeling that the world might not be as harsh as it seemed at first glance. The plane continued its flight, and though they didn't yet know what would happen next, hope hung in the air. Hope for change, both in the world and in the hearts of people. The plane finally landed, and although Pam was still deeply affected by her conversation with Bob, she felt that changes had already begun within her. When she got up from her seat, her legs felt a little heavy from the emotions she had experienced, but she walked confidently. It was a small victory for her, not on the surface, not in the judgment of others, but inside herself. Bob remained seated, his face once again calm and indifferent, like a person accustomed to long journeys. But his eyes shone with a different light, the same one Pam had seen in the first moment when he reacted to her aggression, not sinking into it, but trying to understand why she was behaving that way. She approached the plane's exit and stopped. Bob's gaze was the last thing she saw before she ascended the stairs to the terminal. She felt that their meeting, though brief, had changed her, and it was only the beginning of what she was meant to understand. This wasn't just a story about racism, it was a story about humanity, about how important it is to step back in time, to start listening and understanding. When Pam stepped out of the terminal, the cold wind gently touched her face, and she took a deep breath. The time for change had come. She knew that there would still be hard work ahead of her, but now there was space in her heart for change, for the realization of how important it is not only to defend your position, but also to give others a chance to tell their story. But, first and foremost, she realized that she needed to give herself a chance to change. And this was the moment when she took the first step toward becoming a different person. And although Bob had long since left her, she felt that his words stayed with her, that their dialogue would become an important memory to which she would return. In the end, even small steps can lead to great change, and this journey was just the beginning.